Hello everyone and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today we're talking about There She Goes, an anthology of new travel writing by women which will be published by Saraband Books. And I'm delighted to be joined by the editor of the anthology, Esa Aldegheri. Hello Esa.
Hello.
So first of all, how did this anthology come about? How did you become involved in it?
It has been rattling around my head for years and years because of all the stories that women tell each other in places that are certainly off the beaten track and off the beaten printed track, as it were, about travel that are different and interesting and joined in by the common theme of women's bodies and what happens when you travel through the world, whether trying to get through the supermarket with twins or trekking up a mountain with your period. And these stories are shared abundantly by voice in cafes or pubs or walks or, the corners between caring responsibilities that women have. But they're very rarely printed.
Yeah.
And so when I myself was travelling the world as a woman of many various ages and stages, alone or with others, I kept on thinking, where are the stories of us? Where are these other stories of these crazy adventures or these really normal things that are difficult and brave things that we do, but are not considered maybe real or worthy of printed, publishing honour? And so the question was in the back of my mind for ages and ages, and I've been talking about it with pals for years in pubs and walks, and the title comes from an occasion when I was in a pub chatting away about women and real travel writing, and a man who shall remain nameless kind of rolled his eyes and said, God, there she goes again, on and on. And I thought, one day I'll write a book about this and that'll be the title. And then the idea became even better. I was like, one day I will get a bunch of brilliant women writers and they can write the book and I can, be the gardener of their words in a way. So that's what happened and I'm delighted.
And it really is a bunch of fantastic writers. We'll go into the details in a moment and how you kind of have got them. But it's really interesting what you're saying, because I was reading your introduction and thinking all of the things you said are true and actually are rarely written about in the context of home, never mind how it changes when you travel. Because lots of things, not just obviously language, but cultures and different ideas about what's acceptable, what perhaps isn't acceptable, particularly for women, change country to country and all those things. So if they're hardly written about here, I imagine they're rarely written about and shared, when people are travelling.
Yeah. And then an interesting thing about travelling, of course, is the returning home and then sharing the stories and what is considered worthy of travel writing or isn't. I was reading Jan Carson, that amazing travel writer, who apparently said, I don't really like being considered a travel writer. I prefer people to think of me as a writer who travels. And I thought, that's it.
That's the quote I've got written down.
Oh,
absolutely.
There you go. Great minds.
Because the writers you have here, the ones that I know, and I know quite a few of them and their work, I wouldn't have considered them travel writers. They are writers who have travelled. Linda Cracknell's a great example, because I first read Linda as a writer of fiction. A fantastic writer of fiction, and then I read kind of a nature book which was published by Saraband, but there was travel in that as well, and actually travel and nature kind of cross over quite a few times in the anthology.
They do, and I didn't expect that either to happen, but it was interesting to me. It's been so interesting and enjoyable, this whole process, but when I approached people, these women, to ask, would you like to be part of this adventure? And that's how I phrased it. I said, look, I don't know where it's going to go, but this is the central idea. Do you want to join in? And a lot of them said, yes, that sounds great, but I don't consider myself a travel writer. I thought, there we have it. And so we had really interesting exchanges of ideas and thoughts, and people were saying, do you think I could write about that? And I would be saying, yes, do it, brilliant. And then as the time went on and the making grew, people would come back to me saying, do you know, the idea we talked about at the beginning, actually that's not what wants to come out. It wants to be about this whole other different thing. Yeah. And one of them, Marjorie Lotfi, in her piece, says that writers know that writing is like a journey. You start off thinking it's going to go somewhere and then it ends up in a completely different place. And I love that metaphor as well of what's happened.
Because each of the chapters takes the reader on their own journey as well, and to unexpected places, which I think is really interesting. And we'll maybe talk about the themes there later, which emerge and how they emerge. But so did you have a pitch to these writers? Was it just, would you like to come on this journey? Was it as simple as that? Or, did you have a kind of sales pitch before when you went to all of them?
The spirit of the invitation was an invitation to an adventure.
Right.
And then I suppose there was a sales pitch, which was what we've talked about just now, that these are all the stories that women do share, but they're very rarely in print. And shall we change that? Shall we change that and thereby open a new conversation about travel writing, women, but wider than that as well? I would really want to say repeatedly that this is not a book for women just because it's by women or about women travelling. I hope that people will agree it's for anyone who's interested in wider, broader conversations about bodies moving through a world we all share, whoever those bodies are, and then that widens out the conversation to whose stories are allowed, whose stories are considered worthy of being real travel writing or being printed or being shared even. So that was, I think, the widening of the adventure as the pieces kept on coming in, and I kept on thinking, wow, this is broader than I even thought at the beginning, and that's great. Let's see how it goes, where it ends up. I mean, and then maybe it won't end. Maybe this is another beginning. Well, that would be wonderful.
Right. This certainly could be many more, I think.
There she goes again.
There she goes again, exactly. I did think, was it linked to the last song, There She Goes, which the first two lines are There She Goes Again, which is a great song.
Not originally, I have to say, but I mean, it could be.
It could be, yeah. You might get some sales in Liverpool.
Maybe.
With the band. From.
A fine place.
Exactly. But I mean, the anthology does ask questions about the very nature of travel writing. It certainly challenged my ideas of what might be travel writing.
Great.
Did you expect that to happen, or was that a surprise to you?
I very much hoped it would happen. And I was really glad when it did. And I think part of my editing joy was in putting the stories in an order so that the different challenges to preconceived or predetermined ideas of travel writing evolved as the stories went through the various themes. I really enjoyed that so much, because they almost ask questions. One asks a question and then the next one answers it and then picks it up and passes it on again, like a baton or a bouquet or something.
When you're editing, it's quite rare. I've spoken to lots of writers on this podcast. I've very rarely, I think, spoken to editors. How do you go about formatting it? Which comes first, which is in the middle? Do you try and tell a story throughout? Is it a case of thinking, yes, that one hands on well to the next one? That must be one of the big challenges of editing.
It was one of the joys for me. And maybe it's connected to the fact that I am also a writer.
Yeah.
So I've written a travel book myself, and it was really helpful to be edited well by someone who said, that's not the beginning, is it though? Really, think about it. Or do we need that incident at all? Does it do anything for the story? Does it move it forward? Does it inform? Does it delight? So I found that very helpful. And also I've been edited. I'm also an academic. I'm a scholar, and academic writing is a whole other world of maybe not very interesting sentences sometimes, so it's really interesting being edited badly too by someone who keeps on picking at commas when the point is not the comma. The point is the story. And so I think I didn't realise it, but I found that so many aspects of my different works in the realm of thought and word smithing came together in the editing in ways that I had not expected at all, and I really enjoyed. And I think what you said was very much the case. If a piece, by piece I mean contribution, directly hands over to another one, almost like a baton relay, then that was an obvious choice. Okay, so that one has to go before that one. But it wasn't always so easy. It was a bit like Tetris. I love Tetris, so that was also a helpful skill. Who knew? My 12-year-old self. What fits and what doesn't it evolves in the making. So I did a lot of reading and then going for walks with the pieces in my head, almost like a conversation I was rerunning, in a way.
That sounds like an interesting journey in itself.
It was wonderful.
Walking
really
around
good.
with all of these tales in your head. So why these writers and how did you get them involved?
Because they're all brilliant. They're all brilliant writers. I have read all their writing. Not all of their writing.
Yeah, sure.
So what I mean is all these writers I have long admired for what writing of theirs I have read. And so it was an honour to be able to approach them. Some of them I count as friends, which is doubly delightful. And it was great to be able to approach them and say, this is an idea. In different ways, some of them were, we had conversations that naturally flowed into, so what are you doing next? You know how writers talk to each other. I've done that. What are you doing next? And so I said, I've got this idea. I've got to do this idea. It's itching my brain. And their faces lit up. And I'd say, do you fancy it? And they said, yes. So then we emailed and made it happen. And some of them I approached without having been in touch before and said what I said before, I've got this idea, it's an adventure, do you fancy? And it was an interesting art as well, because the original list was not this list.
Right.
People said yes and then got COVID, or then a bereavement happened, or a pregnancy happened, or, in a way like the journey of life.
Yeah.
And so it was an interesting balance, but I couldn't tell everyone, this is who's going to be in the party, the room, the walk, whatever.
Yeah.
I couldn't, because it wasn't certain until almost the very end. People were dropping out and then being asked. So it was evolving as the pieces kept on coming in too. So
that sounds like an interesting story in itself. The reasons why, again, maybe linked to body, health, situation,
so
that people couldn't do it.
The twist in the tale or the path.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going back to this idea that writers who travel rather than travel writers. I mean, I know some of the writers through their nature writing, through their fiction, through history, their language, politics, poetry. I mean, there's a real broad spectrum of. I'm not going to say this is what they principally do, but it's what I kind of maybe know them best for. Could let you talk a bit about some of the writers involved.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, talking of poetry, one of my favourite poems is Migration Day by Roseanne Watt.
Yeah. From
her Moder Dai. Apologies for my Shetland pronunciation, but
fabulous
an amazing poem. And so, I tiptoed towards asking her with almost not reverence, but with great fangirl shyness. And I was delighted when she got it and said, "Yeah, let's do this." And another wonderful poet is Marjorie, whom I've mentioned, and Alice Tarbuck. Her poems are so magical and strange and in a wonderful way. And again, her contribution to the anthology is deeply moving.
It is, it really is.
Poetic and beautiful. Claire Askew is another great poet. Her book, This Changes Things, I loved reading that. And she talks about pilgrimage, which is a very interesting concept, because in many ways that was historically the one way of travelling that was sanctioned for women.
Yeah.
You were allowed to go there. And one of Margaret Elphinston is another one of the wonderful writers. Her book about the wonderful Norse woman who goes on pilgrimage to Rome and tells her story, The Sea Road. Yeah. And she references that book in her contribution as well. So to me it became quite clear early on that Margaret's piece was the last one.
Right.
Because she takes us on a journey through time as well, across time in her own life. I'm not going to give too much away.
No, but it is a great way to finish.
It's like, that's the last one. That's done. And so then that almost helped to work back up the way. Roxani Cristalli is another wonderful contributor and was clearly the first one for me, because she opens up with some lovely sentences, beautifully wrought, about return and home and what it is to travel as a solo woman in places and cultures where that's deeply weird, like an aberration. And so that was for me an opener, because in so many of the shared stories that are never printed, then that's one of the factors of, the questions. Did you go alone? Were you alone when you travelled or not? Because of course that has its advantages and disadvantages too. It's
a great opening chapter, because initially it reads like what you might expect from a travel book. It's foreign travel, it's different places, different customs, and then you think, oh no, this is, especially after having read your introduction, this is the perfect place to open. It kind of sets the scene for
the twist of what is home and what is return. And then because of the theme of home and return, for me, it was obvious that the next piece should be by Lina Rustom Nammari, who's a Palestinian woman and an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And she writes about crossing El Jisr, which is the name given to the Allenby Bridge from the West Bank to Jordan. And she writes as someone whose travel is brutally restricted by illegal occupation and all that entails. And then the immediate and obvious contrast to that was Linda Cracknell's piece about going overland blithely because, you know, she, like myself, has, quote unquote, the right passport and the right name or nationality to go unchallenged and just, you know, travel away. And that in itself is a question: who's allowed and who isn't.
Who's given permissions and who isn't.
And who can travel with ease and who can't. And then Amanda Thompson's piece comes after that, and she asks the same question in the context of being a woman of colour and travelling with a female partner, a romantic partner in the deep south of the United States, for example, where that's not always permitted. It doesn't make the travelling easy. So that was a sense of real, you know, one thing following on from the other very easily, and then it was a bit of a block. What next? What should go next? But Amanda asks many questions in her piece, and one of them is about staying at home, which was a challenge I didn't really expect in terms of questions raised about travel.
Do you think that was partly down to the timing? I'm presuming these were, when were these written? Was it after COVID, during, or what was the situation?
Well, that's it. Some of them, so Amanda, all of them were written after.
Right.
But some of them have their roots very clearly in COVID, because the piece that comes after Amanda's is by Sarah Thomas, and that is set absolutely in lockdown in Dumfries and Galloway, and the situation is that she cannot stay at home because there's a threat, which you have to read the book to hear
absolutely.
it. But then she finds solace through, as you say, nature and travel. And the interaction between the world.
And her interaction with nature is almost primal, you know, the walking through the various parts of the local scenery. Yeah,
really, really, very much so. And that sense of the language of non-human things being something you can lose yourself in but also find yourself in. And language is another huge theme throughout the whole book as well. Leonie Charlton references the Gaelic.
Yes.
Really interestingly in her piece. And she talks about travelling through the Highlands, as does Lee Craigie, who upends the parameters of competitive bike travel. Yeah,
that's a great piece as well, because I know that part of the world as well, kind of Cairngorms and Ballater and everything, and it's really interesting. Yeah. Because, you know, I've seen these bikers, these cyclists on the road, and to get the kind of inside the headspace of one of them was so interesting. Really interesting and so vivid as well. Very much. So the Highlands do feature, and there's also a lot of quite I really hesitate to use the word domestic. I don't like it for a lot of reasons, but stories about travelling with small people, with tiny babies, and what that means, what that does to yourself as a woman who used to travel, you know, as it were, freely or without babies. And so the theme of motherhood, whether that is becoming a mother and then losing that child. So there's a tenderness warning, as it were, in that sense, because a few of the contributors talk about that particular grief. Yeah. Gemma Neville writes about that so expressively, and Alison Phipps. And Gemma also talks about having twins and how much that is a massive epic endeavour to get out of the house. As a mother of twins, I can confirm, you know. So, wow. And Kerry Nee Doherty writes so movingly about what happens when you become a mum and the map of the world you knew is erased. Yes. And you have to reform what it means to travel in the world as a new person, in a sense. I was moved by all of them very much. And then Roseanne Watts surprised us both by we started off with a particular conversation about what should, you know, or could be in this piece about remoteness and how that is ridiculous, and let's not use that word ever again, and island living, and how, you know, the centre is the centre if you're there, and it ended up becoming more of a piece about, again, with questions perhaps more than answers. You know, what do you do in a body that's too ill to travel? What happens? The questions that it provokes right through the book provokes right throughout are amazing. Roseanne's one about the whole concept of home and place, and is it a physical place is it a state of mind, whatever that might be, you know, really makes you think about your own attitudes to these questions.
Yeah, and safety as well, feeling safe, feeling that you can be yourself in this situation and travel safely is a question that comes up variously and very explicitly in Jeanette Ayachi's piece about travelling in Italy, finding love, starting a family, and then again you have to read the book. But
I thought that chapter, that felt like it was the beginning of a book in itself, you know.
What a
life story that
you have to ask Jeanette.
So initially, were there ideas and themes that you wanted to cover, or do they all emerge through the responses?
I didn't want to cover the themes. I wanted to invite brilliant writers to think about the question of how are we going to make a book that tells these stories that are rarely shared in printed travel writing with a capital T and a capital W, and the themes could be these, but we don't know what else will come up, what else will be raised. So I didn't want to write the book because I felt I'd written one already. I wrote a book called Free to Go. There's a theme in terms of titles going on, I realised, and it was about a motorbike journey and contrasting the freedom of that with the lockdown as a mother. To a previous journey made with a very loved man as a person who wasn't yet a mother. So the contrasting of freedom and unfreedom and staying and leaving was already there, but I wanted to put into print almost the feeling of those stories that women just share. And you say in Italian uno tira l'altro, like one brings another one out, one pulls out another, that would be it, one pulls out another, and it's what happens, you know. Someone talks about, like Anna Fleming, going up Mont Blanc and getting your period in a rifugio full of men. And someone else will say, oh yeah, God, I remember the time when I went and this happened. And then someone else says, oh yeah, and my cousin, you'd never believe what happened to her. And that's what I wanted to recreate. And that was something I didn't want to do myself, because it has to be a collective.
Well, I mean, going back to your introduction again, you talk about women's experiences shared. And it seems to me that sharing and storytelling, that idea is absolutely central to what you're doing.
Yes. Definitely.
And that's why if you take that as the kind of over arc of the anthology, then you can see it almost allows all these different stories to breathe, because you're not saying, well, it has to be about the time I went to a place and how you were treated and all. It's just saying, what do you respond to this? How do you respond to this? Share it with us. Share it with the readers.
And let's hold categories lightly. There's so much, for far too long, has been about categories and what women should do or not do, or be or not be, or look like or not look like, and it's boring.
But travel writing itself, I think, had that about it, you know, that it was almost I always thought there was something colonial about what was going on with travel writing, you know, and which you could never accuse this novel of being. So
that's one relief.
This anthology of being. Okay. But did you have, before you started writing yourself, did you have a kind of set idea of what a travel writer was and what a travel book was?
Before I started writing my own travel book? Probably a received one, because before I set out on the journey with the lovely man, it was going to be a motorbike journey, but we didn't have a motorbike, or you know, we weren't able to ride one either, neither of us, and so that was interesting. And if something is scary, what I do is read about it. So it's a form of procrastination. Information is power, something like that. So I was looking for books about women motorbike journeys, women bikers, and there were very few. There were some great ones, but most of them were solo bikers who were kind of trying to be as macho as men, or the imprint of the story was following the great macho motorbike riders of, you know, glorious history. And I thought, great but, or great and, you know. And then when I came back and then became a mum and started doing other things and started writing differently, I thought, how, you know, and this idea came about the travel anthology with a twist, with a difference. I started looking at anthologies of women's travel writing and thought, oh, a lot of these are either historical, so, women who are ahead of their time, breaking the mould, or contemporary, but women who are being as heroic and bold and brave and strong as the men. Mm-hmm. And always the parameter, or the way that you compare greatness to, is the men. Mm-hmm. And I thought, this doesn't have to happen. This is a false comparison. Or, you don't. We know we can be really brave, really strong, really bold. Like, yes, we can do that and be that way, but do we have to nearly die in a kayak off Alaska for our stories to be considered travel writing? I refuse to believe it. And so there we had it. That was the idea. Yeah,
there was a kind of exceptionalism, wasn't there? I think even a macho nature rather than a masculine nature, a macho nature. Go back to Hemingway or something like that I'm going to do the things that you could never do.
Yeah, and thinking about it with my scholar hat, what I realised was happening was that some of the themes or the lenses was conquest.
Yes, right.
You're conquering your own pain, your own fear, the territory, the new land, this horizon that has never been discovered yet. Of course, as we know it, people live there. It's just you don't talk to them. You bold, like Kathleen Jamie's brilliant lone enraptured male sentence phrase about that kind of male traveller in colonial times, of course. Yeah. But still, you read some blogs and you hear some interviews and you think, could this be in the 1800s or even earlier?
Yeah.
And it still could. It's still the same parameter of conquest and of glorious solo macho achievement, and this anthology is not about that.
No, it absolutely is not. That idea, I used to think that as a youngster watching Star Trek and saying to boldly go where no one has gone before, and think, but the people who live there are already there.
What about the aliens?
What's that all about? And there's quite a few pieces we've talked about the idea of staying and home, and there's quite a few about travelling at home, as you're travelling in and around Scotland or elsewhere. And are the ethics of travelling, have they kind of changed forever? What I mean by that is, you think about jumping on a plane now twice before you do it, carbon emission, all sorts of things, the economics of it, apart from anything else, to kind of go elsewhere. And then you've got the twist on that is the economics of travelling at home these days as well. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if the idea of travelling in itself has kind of changed for a number of reasons.
I think it's certainly changing, and I hope this anthology will be a part of that conversation about how it has changed, is changing, could change. So some of the writers overtly express this discomfort. So Linda Cracknell goes overland from Scotland to Morocco because of the world, the planet burning. And Amanda talks about, and Gemma as well, they talk about looking back on, decades of travelling blithely without thinking, the sort of Lonely Planet ticking off.
Yeah.
Great places to go, and not even thinking what that meant, because that wasn't yet the culture or the conversation. So I think it's about widening conversations and even starting them, and maybe this book is doing that.
I know, absolutely right. It did make me think about my own travelling in the past, and how you would go to a very lovely safe hotel, often explicitly safe hotel if it was somewhere in Asia or something like that, and the only locals you may encounter would be working there in the hotel, or working in the markets, whatever it might be. And and then if you wanted to explore, as I eventually wanted to do, you don't have to explore too far to get a more realistic feature. Singapore's a great example. You've got this incredibly wealthy strand, if you like, and then a lot of deep poverty on other sides. I just wonder if that idea of travelling is kind of, it might not have, but is not perhaps changing, but being examined more.
Yeah, I think certainly, I would say absolutely it's being examined more, and then that will lead to change, presumably. So, but I think it was interesting what you said about Scotland. Most of these women are Scotland based.
Yeah.
Which I suppose just says about me and what I read and the people that I interact with more than an intention. But in a way that was how it worked out. And then that really helped us with the publishers. Saraband put together a bid for Creative Scotland funding to support the authors' pay. So they all got paid for their contribution thanks to Creative Scotland's.
And apart from anything else, it's just
funding.
a great example of fantastic writers writing and living and in the country.
Isn't it great? Yeah. And it's only 17.
Yeah.
So there's loads more.
There's loads more. I've got down here, will there be a second edition? I mean, we could do with much more of this sort of thing.
We could. I mean, if Creative Scotland are listening, thank you. Can we have more money? Or, do you know anyone else who might fund us? I'd be up for it. It was such a joy. It really was. It has been. And it will continue. I mean, the launch is not yet happened as we speak, so that'll be a good
Do you have dates for the launch?
Yes, next week, the 6th of March at Portobello Books.
And that's the day of when it's published, isn't it?
Yeah, in time for International Women's Day. And the 6th of March is also International Book Day, so that's brilliant. Quite good timing. So it'll be at Portobello Books, and it'll also be a hybrid event, so it can be accessed online. And I hope there'll be other celebrations too, because there's wee clusters of these fantastic writers across Scotland.
Yeah.
So maybe one in the Highlands and one in Dumfries and Galloway, and then one in Orkney or Shetland. We'll see.
Yeah.
But I think the spirit of celebration is a good one to follow.
Going back to kind of my response to it, I think so many things surprised me and made me think. Marjorie Lofty talks about the commute, and I thought, yeah, that is travel. Of course it's travel. I'd never considered that before.
Yeah.
But the way that you maybe use that as a time to think, to ponder, all of those things. And then Alice Tarbuck's really is about grief at the centre of it, which, it kind of blindsided me a little bit. I did not expect that.
As grief does.
Yes, absolutely true.
So, no, I didn't expect that either. It was wonderful. I've got goosebumps.
Yeah.
It's wonderful, a wonderful piece. Yeah, no, I loved Marjorie Lofty when she talked about the commute. Again, like you, I thought, why is that not travel?
Yeah.
It is travel.
It is.
So that question kept on coming up. Why is that not travel? Oh, it is. So widening the conversation again.
And I think that's what this does. It widens the conversation. And again, I think it's because it's not prescriptive about what travel writing is. Mm-hmm. It's just writers writing about your travel. It's so wonderful in that way. And did working on it change your thoughts on that, if you can say it's a genre? I suppose travel writing is a genre. It certainly features in bookshops when it is.
It does, yeah.
And did it change your thoughts on kind of what it's capable of?
Yeah, because here we are doing it.
Yeah.
This is what it's capable of. It's capable of what people do. And if people want to ask questions and change things, then it can change. So I really look forward to seeing this book on the shelves in that section next to, the names of travellers who are perhaps defunct and of a certain mould.
Yeah.
A kind of conquering man mould. And I'm really keen to say this book is not only for women. It's not for men
not.
at all. There are many lovely men travellers out there.
And it's just so empathetic in ways that I didn't really expect. Whether it was about staying at home. I mean, the two you spoke about, even their titles, what it is to stay and stay at home, got me thinking, oh crikey, well, how's this going to fit in?
Amanda and Sarah.
That's right, yeah. So it really does challenge notions of travel writing, but in the end of the day, it is just great writing.
Yes, it is.
About travel, which is what you see in your introduction.
Yeah.
So we have come full circle. That's it.
And it's been a real joy for me to do, in parallel to my other work as a scholar. I work at the University of Glasgow. I've got a Leverhulme Research Fellowship to investigate how journeys that are perhaps most broadly considered like refugee journeys, so for example crossing the Channel on a small boat that is considered illegal, how journeys are differently narrated and bordered. So that one tract between Calais and Dover can be an illegal boat journey, or a heroic cold water swim, or a booze cruise, or just nipping across to Paris under the water on a train that you need a passport to get on. But they're very differently bordered and narrated depending on who is doing the journeying. And my whole research asks, okay, so that's a fact, and how does that different narrative and different borders put on different people then impact integration when people live together in communities down the line, down the journey? What happens? How do these different borders and narratives affect us as we interact as humans in the world, in this country, in Scotland? So it was really interesting to be doing that with my scholar brain and then be doing this with my creative brain. And there's a lot of listening involved in editing an anthology. You listen to the themes and the questions and the reluctances. And I had a few of these writers saying, actually, I said I'd write about that, but I can't. Can we change it, please? Okay. I can't put that in. And every time I said, of course, you do what you need to do and take out what you need to take out. And so that was revealing a lot to the writers themselves that they hadn't realised. So it was really wonderful to be able to listen in that way.
Did any writers feel that they were out of their comfort zone writing about these things? Did they mention that?
They didn't say.
Didn't say.
Maybe they'll come up and tell me off air.
But that might be, I've done enough writing classes in the past to know that some of the challenges are almost directly to do something that you haven't done previously.
Sure.
And maybe, I can imagine in such a place going, write about travel, and that's it. And then, you think, okay, right, it really would make you think about how you might approach that.
I didn't hear from anyone that there was a challenge in the writing, but a few of the contributors have said, actually, do you know what, on reflection, I don't think I could read that out. I think it would be too hard for me to go there again, reading it out and maintain composure.
Yeah.
So that's, interesting that they've realised that. And that may change too, as time goes on.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because as I say, some of the pieces are very sore. They deal with grief and loss, which is a burden we carry through the world, all of us. So as we travel.
You spoke about your own work, and there are certain journeys that you mentioned that they seem to be only narrated by certain people and not narrated by the people themselves. I'm thinking about, small boats over the English Channel or whatever it might be. We're told about them in the news or by certain politicians or whatever. We rarely hear from the people who are in those boats.
Yeah, and may that change.
Yeah.
May that change, because the way a story is presented or framed changes everything, and whose voice is considered legitimate or listenable or printable is part of the same continuum of questioning that is this conversation that we're having in a way with this anthology. Whose stories matter, whose are allowed, whose are permitted or honoured by printing as travel writing, or sensational journalism, stirring the pot of some people are allowed in and some are not. So that's part of this conversation too, I think.
And do you think, I was saying, did it change your ideas on travel writing? Do you think it might even change your own writing going forward?
Well, I hope so, in that I hope that having lived and thought with these brilliant writers, my own writing will be more beautiful, in a percolation, osmosis almost way. Some of the turns of phrase really, when you read something and it stops you, you think, wow.
There's some great examples of that.
They just did that. Yeah. May my writing improve and be more able to do that as well.
I think I'm just thinking as we talk now, actually nearly every piece is about, it's so personal and so thought out, whereas a lot of travel writing, my experience, and the kind we've spoken about, is about the other. It's about, well, here I am and all these things are different to me, this is actually inclusive, shared stories, and it allows empathy with the reader, whereas a lot, I think, of writers say, I could never do that, and it's meant to make you feel like you could maybe never do that.
Do you know, I didn't think of that already. There you go. I'm thinking of new things. Yeah, I suppose, that's true. That's true. And there's a lovely sentence about travel writing that places are made new through the words on the page. I really like that thought, and certainly all these contributions do that. But I like that. I like that idea of the reader shouldn't feel intimidated. And every piece will take the reader on a journey, and they don't even have to leave their own room if they don't want to. That's the best kind, isn't it? The best kind.
And I have to ask you, did you learn to ride a motorbike?
Yes. I got to New Zealand in the end.
Oh, wow, that really is.
Yeah, you could buy my other book and read about it.
So what's that called?
Free to Go.
Okay.
And it was published in 2022 by John Murray.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. So.
Esa, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you, particularly about this book, There She Goes, which, I didn't really know what to expect. I probably had preconceptions about what to expect, and they all went out the window within about 3 chapters.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Great.
And it's called There She Goes, New Travel Writing by Women. It is published with Saraband Books on the 6th of March, when the launch is also at Portobello Books in Edinburgh. And I highly, highly recommend it. And we will be back soon with someone completely different.